If you've ever laid awake at 2 a.m., wondering why someone who seemed so distant, so unreachable, so unbothered during the day suddenly feels like they might be thinking about you in the middle of the night, I want you to know something right away. You are not imagining this. You are not making it up to soothe yourself. There is a real psychological reason why avoidant partners tend to feel the most longing, the most missing, the most unguarded emotion in the quiet hours of the night, and almost never when the sun is up and the world is watching. Today, I want to walk you through exactly why that happens, what is actually going on in an avoidant person's mind and body during those hours, and just as importantly, what you should and should not do with that information. Because understanding this can either set you free, or if you use it the wrong way, keep you stuck in a loop that costs you your self-respect. Let's start with the foundation, because you cannot understand the 2 a.m. phenomenon without understanding what avoidant attachment actually is. Avoidant attachment isn't a personality flaw. It isn't a character defect. It is a nervous system adaptation. Somewhere early in that person's life, usually in childhood, they learned a very specific lesson, and the lesson was this: closeness is not safe. Maybe a caregiver was inconsistent. Maybe emotional needs were dismissed or mocked. Maybe independence was praised while vulnerability was punished, even subtly. Whatever the specific story, the nervous system drew a conclusion, and it drew it early, before language, before logic, before the person could ever consciously choose otherwise. The conclusion was this: if I let someone in completely, if I need someone too much, I will get hurt, disappointed, or engulfed. So the safest thing to do is keep one foot out the door at all times. This is why avoidant partners can seem warm and engaged one week and cold and distant the next. It's not that their feelings for you disappeared, it's that intimacy itself, closeness itself, triggers an internal alarm system. Think of it like a smoke detector that's a little too sensitive. It doesn't just go off when there's an actual fire. It goes off when someone makes toast. The moment things start to feel close, connected, or emotionally significant, that alarm goes off, and the avoidant nervous system responds the only way it knows how. It creates distance. Sometimes that distance looks like suddenly being busy. Sometimes it looks like a shift in tone, a delay in texting back, a pulling away right after a really good connected moment together. This is what we call deactivation, and it's one of the most confusing things a partner can experience, because it often happens right when things seem to be going well. Now here's where it gets interesting, and here's where the 2 a.m. piece comes in. During the day, an avoidant person has access to every tool in their emotional toolbox. They have work to distract them. They have friends to text. They have hobbies, errands, gym sessions, Netflix, social media, 100 different ways to keep their nervous system occupied and their guard fully up. The day is armor. The day is noise. The day gives them 1,000 socially acceptable reasons to not sit with what they actually feel. If you texted them at 2 p.m. and didn't get a response, it's easy for their mind to justify it. They were busy. They were focused. They didn't even really think about it because there was too much else going on. But 2 a.m. is different. 2 a.m. strips all of that away. There's no meeting to prep for, no friend to distract them, no scrolling that can hold their attention forever. The noise of the day goes quiet, and what's left is stillness. And in that stillness, the mind does what it always does when external stimulation disappears. It turns inward. This is true for everyone, not just avoidant people, but it hits avoidant people in a very specific way because they have spent so much of their waking life avoiding exactly this kind of inward turn. All day, every day, they've been managing, suppressing, redirecting. And then the lights go off, the phone goes down, and there's nowhere left to run. This is when the walls that felt so sturdy at 9 a.m. start to feel thinner. This is when the version of you that they pushed away during the day, the version they told themselves they didn't need, quietly reappears in their mind. Not because they suddenly changed their whole personality, not because 2 a.m. is magic, but because 2 a.m. is when their defenses are lowest. And it is precisely in those low defense windows that real feelings, the ones that were there all along underneath the avoidance, tend to surface. I want to be really clear here because I don't want you to walk away from this with the wrong idea. This does not mean every avoidant person is lying awake sobbing over you every single night. It does not mean their love for you is somehow bigger or more real at 2 a.m. than it is during the day. What it means is that the accurate picture of how they feel is more visible at night than during the day, because during the day, their coping mechanisms are working at full strength, actively suppressing and minimizing, and at night, those coping mechanisms have less material to work with. You are seeing something closer to their baseline emotional truth, not something extra or exaggerated. Let's talk about the biology for a second, because this isn't just some emotional theory. There's actual nervous system science backing this up. During the day, especially when an avoidant person is around other people or engaged in tasks, their sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system, is often subtly activated whenever closeness becomes relevant. That activation is uncomfortable, so the brain reaches for distraction as a form of regulation. Busyness becomes a drug. It's not conscious. Most avoidant people would never describe their behavior this way if you ask them directly. They'd just say they're independent, or that they like their space, or that they're just not a big texter. But underneath that story is a nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do a long time ago: regulate discomfort through distance and distraction. At night, when the body starts to wind down for sleep, the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, becomes more dominant. Cortisol levels, which spike with stress and vigilance, naturally drop in the evening, for most people following a typical circadian rhythm. Melatonin rises. The body physically shifts into a state that is less defended, less alert, more open. This is one of the reasons people cry more easily at night, feel more nostalgic at night, feel more vulnerable at night, regardless of attachment style. But layer avoidant attachment on top of that natural nighttime softening, and you get a very specific and very human moment. Someone whose entire daytime identity is built around not needing anyone, suddenly sitting in the dark with a feeling they can't distract their way out of. This is often the exact moment they think of you, not because they're plotting to text you, not because they've had some grand revelation, but because you represent the thing their nervous system has been avoiding all day: closeness, need, attachment. And at 2 a.m., with nothing left to hide behind, that need doesn't feel as dangerous as it did at noon. It just feels true. Now, here's something I really want you to sit with, because this is where a lot of people get this wrong and end up hurting themselves. Knowing that an avoidant partner might miss you most at 2 a.m. does not mean you should be waiting by your phone at 2 a.m. It does not mean you should text them at that hour, hoping to catch them in their soft moment. In fact, doing that often backfires completely. And I want to explain why, because the reasoning matters. If you reach out at 2 a.m., you are inserting yourself into a moment that was working in your favor precisely because it was private. The whole reason that 2 a.m. softness exists is that the avoidant person feels safe enough, unobserved enough, undemanded enough to let their guard down internally. The second you show up, even gently, even lovingly, you've reintroduced the exact stimulus that triggers their deactivation response in the first place: the presence of another person needing something from them. Even if what you're offering is warmth, their nervous system doesn't always distinguish between a warm need and an overwhelming one. You can turn their most honest, most vulnerable moment into another performance of managing you, and that pulls them right back into the same defended state you were trying to get away from. This is one of the most counterintuitive truths in this whole topic, and it's one I want you to really absorb. The moments when an avoidant partner misses you the most are often the moments you have the least access to. And that's not a cruel joke. That's actually the whole mechanism. Their guard comes down specifically because you're not there asking anything of them in that moment. The second you become present, the guard has a reason to go back up. So what does this actually mean for you practically? It means the healthiest and most powerful thing you can do with this information is not to use it as a tool to reach them in their softest hour, but to use it as a tool to understand what's happening beneath the surface. So you stop taking their daytime distance so personally. When they seem cold, when they take hours or days to respond, when they seem like they've completely compartmentalized you into a small manageable box, you now have a more accurate map of what's actually happening. It's not that the feeling isn't there. It's that the feeling is being actively managed, minimized, and avoided because feeling it fully in front of you in real time still feels unsafe to them. This matters enormously for your own emotional regulation because so much of the pain in loving an avoidant partner comes from a mistaken belief. The belief that their distance is proof of absence, proof that the feeling simply isn't there. When you internalize that belief, you start to feel crazy because some part of you senses that there's more going on, that there's real chemistry, real connection, real history, and yet the behavior in front of you seems to contradict all of that. Understanding the 2 a.m. pattern helps close that gap. It doesn't mean you were wrong to feel that connection was real. It means the connection is real and it's being suppressed, which is a very different and honestly a much healthier thing to know. But I want to be careful here because there's a trap hiding inside this insight, and I see so many women fall into it. The trap is this: using the knowledge that they probably miss me at night as a justification to keep waiting, keep hoping, keep tolerating a daytime relationship that doesn't meet your needs, because you've convinced yourself that the real feelings show up when no one's looking. I need you to hear this clearly. A relationship cannot be built on 2 a.m. feelings alone. You cannot build a life, a partnership, a sense of security out of someone's private, unspoken 3 in the morning longing. You deserve a love that doesn't need darkness and silence to be felt. You deserve someone whose warmth toward you doesn't require the absence of witnesses. So while it's genuinely useful and often deeply validating to understand that avoidant attachment doesn't mean an absence of feeling, it's equally important to hold a boundary around what kind of relationship you're actually willing to accept. Knowing they miss you at night is not the same as having a relationship that functions during the day. And you are allowed, in fact, you are wise, to want both the feeling and the follow-through. Let's talk about what actually tends to shift an avoidant partner's behavior, because understanding the mechanism gives us real clues here. Not magic tricks, not manipulation tactics, but genuine psychological truths about what allows a nervous system to feel safe enough to stop avoiding. The first thing is consistency without pressure. Avoidant partners don't relax around people who chase, plead, or overfunction emotionally, because that reinforces the belief that closeness equals demand. But they also don't build trust around people who disappear, or punish them with silence either, because that reinforces the belief that closeness is unstable and dangerous in a different way. What tends to work over time is steady, warm, low-drama consistency. Someone who shows up the same way, whether the avoidant partner is warm or withdrawn. Someone who doesn't collapse into anxiety every time there's distance and doesn't disappear in retaliation either. That kind of steadiness over weeks and months slowly teaches the nervous system a new lesson. This person is safe, this person doesn't need to be managed, this closeness isn't going to consume me. The second thing that matters enormously is your own emotional regulation. This is maybe the least talked about, most important piece of this entire topic. If you are constantly anxious, constantly checking their phone activity, constantly analyzing every text for hidden meaning, you are, understandably, in a heightened state. And here's the hard truth. 2 dysregulated nervous systems trying to get close to each other usually amplifies avoidance, not reduces it. The more anxious and activated you become, the more your presence starts to feel to their nervous system like exactly the kind of intensity they're wired to avoid. This isn't your fault. Anxiety in these dynamics is often a completely reasonable response to inconsistency. But learning to regulate your own nervous system, learning to soothe your own anxiety independently of their behavior, is genuinely one of the most powerful things you can do, both for your own well-being and, indirectly, for the health of the relationship. The third piece is giving space without giving up your standards. There's a difference between backing off because you're punishing someone and backing off because you have a full life, real boundaries, and real self-respect that doesn't collapse the moment someone goes quiet. Avoidant partners are exquisitely sensitive to the difference between someone who is calm because they're secure and someone who is calm because they're suppressing panic while secretly waiting by the phone. You cannot fake secure. It has to be real, or at least real enough that your nervous system isn't screaming the opposite message underneath your words. Now let's address the question that I know is sitting underneath all of this for a lot of you watching. Does the fact that they miss me at 2 a.m. mean they'll come back? I want to answer this honestly, because I'm not interested in giving you a comforting lie. Missing someone and choosing them are 2 completely different processes. An avoidant person can genuinely, deeply miss you at 2 a.m. and still not do the work required to show up for you consistently during the day. Missing you requires nothing from them. It's passive. It happens in their own mind, in private, with 0 risk. choosing you, actually reaching out, actually being vulnerable, actually building consistency, requires them to face the exact discomfort their whole attachment system was built to avoid. So while the 2 a.m. missing is real, and it does tell you something true about the depth of feeling that exists, it is not on its own a reliable predictor of future behavior. Some avoidant partners do eventually build enough safety, enough self-awareness, enough motivation to bridge that gap between private longing and daytime action. Many do not, at least not without real inner work, and sometimes not within a timeline that's fair to ask you to wait for. This is why I always come back to the same core message. Use this information to understand, not to hope indefinitely. Understanding why they pull away, understanding that the 2 a.m. ache is likely real, can help you release resentment, release the story that they simply never cared, release the confusion that made you question your own perception of the relationship. That's valuable. That's healing, even. But it cannot become a reason to keep shrinking your own needs down to fit whatever crumbs of consistency they're currently able to offer. If you're in a relationship right now with someone who fits this pattern, someone warm at night and distant in the day, someone who seems to soften in private moments and then retreat again once the world is watching, I want you to ask yourself an honest question. Not, do they feel something for me? Because it sounds like the answer is probably yes. The better question is, am I willing to keep building a relationship around the version of them that only shows up in the dark? Or do I need the version of them that can show up in daylight too? That answer is different for everyone, and I'm not here to tell you what it should be. But I do want you to actually ask it, instead of letting the 2 a.m. ache become the thing that keeps you patiently waiting without ever addressing what's missing in the daytime. For those of you who are the avoidant one in this dynamic, and I know some of you watching are, I want to speak directly to you for a moment too. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, if you know that you feel closer to someone at night than you're willing to admit or express during the day, that awareness is actually the first step towards something better. You are not broken for having built these defenses. They made sense once. But the gap between what you feel at 2 a.m. and what you're willing to show at 2 p.m. is exactly the gap that, left unaddressed, will quietly cost you relationships you actually wanted to keep. Closing that gap isn't about suddenly becoming a different person. It's about slowly, in small, manageable doses, letting the daytime version of you tell a little more of the truth that the nighttime version already knows. If there's one thing I want you to take away from everything we've covered today, it's this. The silence, the distance, the seemingly unbothered exterior you see from an avoidant partner during the day is not the full picture, and it never was. But the fuller, softer, more honest picture that shows up at 2 a.m. is also not something you can build a relationship on by itself. Real love needs to survive daylight. It needs to survive ordinary Tuesdays and grocery store trips and the mundane hours when nothing is forcing anyone's guard down. What happens at 2 a.m. tells you the feeling is there. What happens in the daylight tells you whether it's being built into something real. You deserve a love that doesn't need darkness, to be honest. Understand the pattern, release the parts of it that were making you feel crazy, and then hold your standard high enough that you're not settling for a love that only tells the truth when no one else is watching. If this helped you make sense of something confusing in your own life, stay with me, because we're going to keep going deeper into exactly what makes avoidant attachment tick. And more importantly, exactly what you can do in real and practical terms to protect your own heart while you figure out whether this relationship is one worth investing more of yourself into.